Before we step into this nightmare, make sure you subscribe, like, and leave your thoughts below because some mysteries don't stay buried. And this one still whispers from the ashes. November 29, 1970. The icy air above Norway's Isdalen Valley hung thick with fog. Locals called it Death Valley. It was a place hikers avoided after dark, a narrow ravine surrounded by steep rock walls and twisted trees that clawed at the sky. That afternoon, a father and his two young daughters were hiking through the cold brush when they smelled something strange, metallic, bitter, wrong. At first, they thought it was a campfire left behind. Then they saw it. A body lay among the rocks, burned, blackened, still. Police arrived quickly. The valley fell silent except for the crunch of boots on frost-hardened ground. The woman's remains were badly damaged by fire, but investigators immediately noticed something unsettling. She wasn't dumped carelessly. She was positioned almost deliberately, lying on her back, arms slightly bent. Around her were bizarre items: melted plastic bottles, fragments of clothing, an empty liquor bottle, and what appeared to be sleeping pills. There was no purse, no identification. The labels on her clothing had been carefully cut out. Someone had tried to erase her. Inspector Carl Conar was among the first senior officers on the scene. A seasoned investigator, he had seen tragedies before. But something about this felt staged. The autopsy deepened the mystery. Despite the severe burns, examiners discovered that the woman had consumed a high quantity of barbiturates before her death. But here's what disturbed them most: it was found in her lungs. That meant she was breathing while the fire burned. Was it suicide, murder, or something even stranger? Her fingerprints were taken and circulated. No match. Within days, newspapers across Norway were calling her the Isdal Woman. Then the case exploded. 2 suitcases were discovered at a Bergen railway station. They had been left in storage lockers days before the body was found. Inside were wigs, multiple, in different shades. Clothes with labels removed, sunglasses, makeup, and something chilling, a notebook filled with coded writing. The code wasn't random. It consisted of letters and numbers written in tight columns. When investigators cracked it, they uncovered what looked like a travel log: dates and locations across Europe: Paris, Rome, Geneva, Stavanger, Oslo. But here's the twist: each time she checked into a hotel, she used a different name. Witnesses from hotels described her as elegant, well-spoken, and fluent in several languages. She sometimes claimed to be Belgian, other times Swiss. Once, she said she was a photographer. Another time, a traveling saleswoman. She changed her appearance constantly: dark hair one week, blonde the next, different styles of clothing, different accents. One hotel employee recalled something unsettling. The woman insisted on rooms with balconies. She kept the curtains tightly shut. And she was seen counting money, frequently large sums of cash. Why would someone live like that unless they were hiding? Inspector R began to suspect this was no ordinary case. Norway in 1970 sat in a tense geopolitical climate. The Cold War was at its peak. Bergen was home to a strategically important naval base. Foreign intelligence agencies were active throughout Europe. Was she a spy? The coded notebook suggested coordination. The wigs suggested disguise. The cash suggested funding. But if she was part of an intelligence network, why was she dead in a remote valley? And who burned her? As police dug deeper, another strange detail emerged. Dental records revealed extensive and expensive dental work performed in multiple countries. Whoever she was, she had resources, connections, but no one reported her missing. No family came forward. It was as if she had never existed. Investigators tracked her movements in the weeks before her death. In Bergen, she had checked into a hotel under the name Fenia Zahari. Witnesses remembered her vividly. She kept to herself but occasionally asked odd questions about hiking routes near Isdalen. One staff member recalled seeing a man meet her briefly in the lobby. He was well-dressed, foreign-looking. They spoke quietly. No one heard what they said. The next day, she checked out abruptly. And then she vanished into the valley. Police reconstructed her final hours. She likely walked alone into the cold hills. But did she? Footprints were found, but weather conditions had obscured details. Some investigators believed another person had been present. Others insisted it was self-inflicted. Then came the most unsettling discovery of all. Witnesses in the area reported seeing a distressed woman days before the body was found. She appeared disoriented, possibly injured. One man said he offered help, but she refused, speaking in broken English. Was she running from someone, or meeting someone? Inspector R felt the pressure mounting. International inquiries were sent out. Interpol was contacted. Intelligence agencies were quietly approached. And then suddenly the investigation slowed. Files were classified. Questions were redirected. Certain leads were quietly abandoned. Officially, the case leaned toward suicide. Unofficially, many investigators weren't convinced, because one piece of evidence didn't fit. In the woman's suitcase, hidden inside the lining, was a scrap of paper with a phone number. The number was traced to a man connected to military testing activities along Norway's coast. When police attempted to question him, they were told to stand down. No further action required. Inspector R stared at the file late one night. The valley photos spread across his desk. A woman with no name. A dozen identities. A coded travel map across Europe. A possible intelligence link. And someone powerful enough to shut down questions. But the real shock was yet to come. Because when investigators re-examined witness statements from the hotel, they realized something terrifying. The Isdal woman hadn't been alone on her final night. And the man seen with her had never been identified. Not then. The description of the man was frustratingly vague. Mid-30s to 40s, dark hair, well-dressed, foreign accent, calm, controlled. But one detail stood out: he didn't behave like a lover or a friend. According to the hotel receptionist, their interaction was businesslike. No warmth. No argument. No visible affection. Just quiet intensity. Inspector R reopened the hotel logs. The Isdal woman had checked into the Hordeheimen Hotel in Bergen under yet another alias. Staff remembered her because of her unusual behavior. She paid in cash, avoided housekeeping, and always requested a different room if she suspected someone had entered while she was away. She also left something behind. In the ashtray of her final room were partially burned documents, fragments of paper too damaged to fully reconstruct, but chemical analysis revealed something chilling. The papers had once contained maps, and not tourist maps. They were detailed sketches of Norway's western coastline, specifically areas near sensitive military installations. The theory that she was involved in espionage was no longer whispering in the background. It was screaming. The Cold War was in full force in 1970. Norway shared a border with the Soviet Union. NATO forces operated along its coast. Bergen's naval facilities were strategically critical. If she was mapping restricted zones, she wasn't hiking for leisure. But the deeper they dug, the stranger it became. Police managed to track one of the phone calls she made from a hotel in Stavanger weeks before her death. It was placed to a contact in Brussels. When Belgian authorities were contacted, they found no official record of the alias she had used. No passport, no immigration stamps under that name. It was as if she floated across borders without documentation. Then came a break, small but significant. A taxi driver came forward months after the initial investigation. He remembered driving a woman matching her description to the outskirts of Bergen shortly before her death. He wasn't sure at first. It had been weeks, but the photograph unsettled him. He said she wasn't alone. There was a man sitting beside her in the back seat. The driver remembered tension in the air. The woman seemed anxious, glancing repeatedly out the window. The man remained silent for most of the ride. When they reached a remote roadside area, the man paid in cash. Large bills. The driver watched as the woman stepped out first. She hesitated. The man leaned toward her and said something quietly. She nodded. Then they both disappeared into the trees. Inspector Aro's stomach tightened when he read the statement. This was no suicide walk into the wilderness. Someone had accompanied her. And yet there were no confirmed footprints, no second body, no identified suspect. Then came another unsettling revelation from the autopsy report that had been quietly overlooked. The Isdal woman had bruising around her neck. It wasn't conclusive evidence of strangulation, but it was suspicious. Combined with the barbiturates in her system, it suggested incapacitation before the fire. If she had been drugged, she would have been unable to resist. And if someone else set the fire while she was alive, breathing in smoke, that wasn't suicide. That was execution. But why burn her? Fire destroys fingerprints, DNA, identity. It sends a message. Or it silences one. As speculation grew, intelligence agencies quietly monitored the investigation. Officially, they denied involvement. Unofficially, former officers would later admit that Bergen was crawling with foreign operatives during that era. Some believed she was working for Eastern Bloc intelligence. Others thought she was a Western asset who had gone rogue. A double agent exposed, a liability eliminated, but no evidence ever confirmed any of it. Then, years later, something surfaced that reignited the case. In the 1990s, a former intelligence officer anonymously contacted a Norwegian journalist. He claimed that the Isdal woman had been under surveillance weeks before her death. According to him, she had been seen photographing restricted areas near military testing sites. He suggested she wasn't just gathering information, she was meeting contacts. And then he said something that chilled the journalist to the bone. She became a problem. No clarification, no names, just that. When investigators tried to trace the source, the trail went cold, but the case wouldn't stay buried. In 2016, advances in forensic technology allowed for re-examination of the Isdal woman's remains. Scientists analyzed her teeth more precisely, tracking isotopic signatures that could reveal where she grew up. The results narrowed her childhood origins to parts of Central or Eastern Europe, possibly Germany or the Balkans. That discovery eliminated some of the false identities she had used, but it raised more questions. Why would a woman from Central Europe travel under fake names across half of Europe, map military zones, and end up burned in a Norwegian valley? And why did no one ever come looking for her? One retired investigator made a quiet confession years after the case was officially archived. He believed they had identified a likely suspect, the man from the taxi. But they were pressured not to pursue it. The reason? National security. The phrase appeared again and again in internal memos. Evidence requests denied. Interviews blocked. International cooperation delayed. Inspector Oru, long retired by then, would later say in a rare interview that the case felt larger than the police, larger than Norway. And then came the most haunting twist of all. A woman in her 60s contacted authorities decades later. She claimed that in the 1970s, her father, who had worked in intelligence, came home one night visibly shaken. He told her he had handled something in Isdalen. She didn't understand at the time. But when she saw the case on television years later, the Valley name hit her like a lightning strike. When investigators attempted to verify her father's employment records, portions were classified. Again, the Isdal woman remained nameless. But one thing was becoming clearer. She wasn't just a mystery, she was a secret. And secrets, especially during the Cold War, were often buried intentionally, because new evidence would suggest that the Isdal woman may not have been working alone. And someone, somewhere, still knows exactly who she was. For decades, the Isdal woman was treated like a ghost story whispered in police archives, a burned body in a valley, a suitcase of disguises, and a notebook filled with codes. But ghosts don't leave paper trails, secrets do. By the early 2000s, most of the original investigators were gone, retired, elderly, or deceased. The case files sat boxed in storage, labeled but untouched. Officially, it was still classified as an unsolved death. Unofficially, it was something far more complicated. Then journalists reopened the wound. A Norwegian investigative team began re-examining the case in detail. They interviewed surviving witnesses, tracked down hotel staff, and reconstructed her final movements with obsessive precision. Technology had advanced, forensics had evolved, and people who were once too afraid to speak were finally talking. One revelation stood out immediately. The coded notebook in her suitcase, long believed to be a simple travel log, was reanalyzed. Linguists and cryptographers studied the patterns more deeply. The letters and numbers didn't just correspond to cities and dates. They appeared to match known NATO military exercises occurring in Norway at the time. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. She wasn't just traveling randomly across Europe. She was moving in sync with military activity. That realization shifted the case from strange to explosive. Because if she was tracking NATO exercises, she wasn't a tourist. She wasn't just a drifter with multiple identities. She was likely gathering intelligence, but for whom? As the theory of espionage grew stronger, another disturbing detail resurfaced, one that had been buried in early reports. A witness had once described hearing a loud explosion-like sound in Isdalen around the time of her death. It was dismissed at the time as a hunter's rifle or natural echo in the valley. But what if it wasn't? Some experts began speculating that the fire may have been accelerated, Not just a simple blaze from gasoline or alcohol, but something more controlled. Something meant to ensure total destruction of evidence, professional, calculated, intentional. Then came the breakthrough no one expected. In 2017, forensic scientists exhumed the Isdal woman's remains once more. Advanced DNA techniques were applied, including genealogical tracing. It was a long shot, but if even distant relatives could be identified, her true name might finally surface. The results narrowed her lineage to a specific region of southern Germany, not Belgium, not Switzerland. Not any of the identities she had claimed. Germany, investigators quietly contacted German authorities. Records were combed through. Missing persons reports from the 1950s and 1960s were cross-referenced. And then something chilling emerged. A woman from that region had disappeared in the late 1960s under mysterious circumstances. She was multilingual, well-educated, known to travel frequently. And, according to one former acquaintance, she had once mentioned working abroad on sensitive matters. But before the connection could be formally confirmed, the trail went cold again. Records were incomplete, documents missing. And once more, the phrase surfaced in correspondence between agencies, restricted due to national interest. It was as if the truth was visible through frosted glass, close enough to see the outline, but impossible to grasp fully. Then came the most unsettling development of all. A retired Norwegian intelligence officer, speaking anonymously late in life, revealed that during the Cold War, Norway had quietly cooperated with multiple Western intelligence services in counter-espionage operations. Foreign operatives were sometimes monitored rather than arrested, tracked to see who they met, what they gathered. He suggested that the Isdal woman had been under surveillance, and that surveillance may have gone wrong. If you follow someone long enough, he reportedly said, you risk losing control of the situation. Was she exposed? Double-crossed, eliminated by her own handlers? Or by those she was spying on? No official agency has ever admitted involvement. No suspect has ever been named. No identity has ever been publicly confirmed, but the pieces form a haunting picture. A multilingual woman with expensive dental work and access to large sums of cash, a suitcase of wigs and disguises, codes aligning with military activity, meetings with unidentified men, burned maps of sensitive coastal areas, classified interference in the investigation, and a body set ablaze in a valley locals called Death Valley. Some believe she was a spy executed after being compromised. Others think she was a courier who knew too much. A few argue it was suicide, the woman trapped in a dangerous world, choosing her own end. But here's the twist that keeps investigators awake. If it were suicide, why remove every label from her clothing? Why erase her identity so thoroughly? Why ensure no family could ever claim her? That level of erasure feels less like despair, and more like policy. Even today, the Isdal woman remains officially unidentified. Her grave in Bergen is marked simply, quietly. No birth date, no real name, just a reminder that she existed. Somewhere out there, someone likely knows exactly who she was. Perhaps a former operative, perhaps a family member who was told a different story. Perhaps a government archive holding the final missing document. But until those files are unsealed, if they ever are, the truth remains locked away. A woman walked across Europe under false names. She stood on balconies watching the streets below. She counted cash in hotel rooms. She mapped coastlines that governments guarded fiercely. And then she walked into a valley and never walked out. They tried to burn her identity away, but the mystery survived. If you think this case was intense, you're not ready for the next one, because sometimes the scariest crimes aren't the ones where we know the killer. They're the ones where the truth is protected.